call in though.
Yep, so we can do it by phone, that's fine.
Okay, so Steve, if you want to begin the meeting.
All right, we have our crew here. We can start up. Call to order the meeting of April 22nd, 2020 of the Economic Development Commission. And the first thing we'll do is to accept the minutes of February 26th, which were just sent to you again. Anybody have any questions? I need a motion. And any questions? Somebody give me a motion, please.
Sure, this is Bill Dunn. I'll move to accept the minutes of the meeting.
Thank you. Any questions about what was on that set of minutes?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Hearing no discussions, we'll bring it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have to do roll call vote.
Okay.
Steve.
Oh, we do.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, start it off. Give your name and your vote.
Clifton votes yes.
What's that, Cliff?
Clifton votes yes.
Okay.
Bill Dunn votes yes.
I'm going to jump on there. I got Chip Brown calling in. Chip, go ahead.
Okay.
Hi there.
Gabe Dulop
David,
votes yes. Yes.
Yes, I vote yes.
And I vote yes.
Just
That's
keep the screen up and just dial the phone number that's on there. It'll let you in.
all right. We've covered that.
Bye. Yes, Council Hill.
Is there someone who can let me into the economic development meeting?
We don't even show you trying to get in, so just dial the phone number to participate in the meeting.
Okay.
All right. So we got Chip Brown coming in, and Council Hill will be coming in momentarily here.
All right. Now hold for you a second.
Oh, I just wanted to interject something. Sometimes when people can't hear or aren't being heard, it's because under device settings, which is the three little dots on the sort of menu for this Microsoft Teams, there's audio and speaker settings that sometimes can be turned off that are independent of the volume levels on your computer. So I discovered in a WebEx application that it had my volume turned down even though my regular volume was turned up.
Is that under more apps at the bottom?
More actions. It's under more actions. It's the little bar that if you bring your pointer up, it will pop up and show mute, unmute, and a little telephone symbol. There's three dots that are more actions, and under that, under device settings is where you can turn things on and off to some extent.
Okay. I'm going to get myself in trouble here in a minute. I probably already am. Who we got?
Who's that?
Nielsen people.
How do I get that screen to close? There are more apps, Cliff.
There's a little X in the upper right-hand corner.
Not in mine. So far, I haven't hit it yet.
When you get device settings, you clicked on the three dots
Yes.
and device settings opened up.
It didn't see that. That's I guess was the problem was I didn't find that to be the case. I found a bunch of the ones that you could use, and then I see it opened up that screen, and I'm just nervous about cutting it out. There we go.
Steve.
I just backed up. Yeah, I'm all right.
Steve, if you go back to the ellipsis, those three dots where you clicked show device settings, you could probably click hide device settings.
Right. Well, I never got the device settings. I got something else.
Okay.
I'm going to stop for today. We're going to figure this out after the meeting sometime. So
We've
let's,
Chip Brown just joined the meeting.
yeah, okay. We've gone through the acceptance of the minutes and we're going to move forward to the discussion of items. And the first is to appoint a member of the commission to the Downtown Redevelopment Subcommittee. John, what is, has somebody indicated any desire to come off the, or not come off, but to anticipate, to add that to their list of things they're going to be doing? Where are we at with this?
So we need to appoint someone to that, the redevelopment committee. There needs to be a member of the EDC to do that.
Right.
So we're hoping that Bill Dunn will be the.
Well, that's Bill Dunn just unmuted to ask a couple questions, actually. How often does this subcommittee meet?
It hasn't met yet. It could be, we just don't know. That'll be up to the chairperson of that committee to organize that and manage that.
Sure. I will certainly accept that role, and we'll see how it works out.
Excellent.
Right. But the only thing about that is who's going to be, is Arts and Culture going to have somebody else? Because you can't be both.
Okay, so that may present a problem.
Yeah, the Arts and Culture Commission has skipped its last two meetings for March and April. So they have not met to identify anyone for their representative.
That's right. So, David, that's where I remember hearing about this. The Arts and Culture Commission was also appointing someone to the downtown revitalization. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I think we were angling to have that be you on behalf of the Arts and Culture.
So now I have two commissions angling to have me on the same subcommittee.
Yeah, I'd raise my hand to the downtown redevelopment subcommittee.
David? Who was that?
That was Chip.
That was Chip.
Chip?
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, then, if you raise your hand, you're going to be appointed. So we accept your.
Thank you, Chip. Apparently, I'll see you at that committee as well.
Exactly.
So what we need is actually someone to nominate Chip, and then we can vote on that.
Okay. Cliff, Bill?
This is Bill. I'll nominate Chip Brown to be the economic development representative of the subcommittee, the downtown subcommittee.
Got it. A second? Do I have a second out there?
I'll second that. Clifton here.
I've been denied. Yeah.
And all in favor, say aye.
Roll call vote.
Oh, roll call vote again, yes. Okay. Cliff started off again.
Cliff votes yes.
Bill Dunn votes yes.
David Newlove votes yes.
Is Karen here? Did I hear you say, or she didn't get back in yet?
She's still trying to get in. We've got everybody else. I'm not understanding why we can't get her in. She's not even showing up as trying to enter the meeting, so I'm not sure what the problem is there.
All right. So we've got 3. Chip's not, I'll vote. I can vote. Don't need to. We're all set. All in favor, say aye.
Well, we did that. We're all set.
Thank you. We're all set. All right. Now we get to the good part here of discussing the 2017 AGG report. And it is quite interesting. Where would you like to take this?
Well, David, you want to talk a little bit about the report?
Sure. The report grew out of a petition that was circulated around the city in 2017, just expressing concerns about the amount of growth that was being proposed and what it would mean for city services and tax rates and things. So we engaged the Arnett group, Stu Arnett, to take a look. It was a very cursory review, admittedly, to take a look at how a handful of projects impacted the tax rates. Those were projects for which we had a reasonable amount of data for ADG to review, and basically they concluded that it would take an awful lot of commercial development to actually lower the tax rate, but the developments that had happened that were studied basically kept the tax rate from going higher than it might have gone otherwise. So in that sense, they were felt to be positive for the community.
Okay. So there were questions about that, but this question came up the last time, and again, this report was done, paid for by the taxpayers. And any other questions about that issue?
I mean, I've always had this question in my mind on the ability to be able to evaluate kinds of developments specific areas of development, and how accretive they are to the tax base or not, and analyze sort of, what kinds of development or provide the city with the most tax benefit. And then, you balance that with just overall quality of life in the city and what those developments bring to the quality of life. But I'm not sure of a great way to go about analyzing that. It's like you've seen the studies or the sort of feedback from things like senior housing that started off, everybody thought, well, this is perfect, it's no hit to the schools, and then you sort of roll forward and find out that there's a different cost deduct that's happening. Mm-hmm. And it would be productive, I would think, for the city to understand, what kind of investments, what kind of developments give the most return to the tax base. And I'm not sure that the 17 report really captured that.
No, I don't think it was intended to. I mean, that was, again, that was a very cursory review. There have probably I think in 2004 or so, the city had a cost of community services study done, and I believe it was based on 2002 data. And it was a pretty comprehensive review trying to figure out what exactly the question you just asked, what kinds of development benefit the city the most. The firm that was hired to do that did not use the American Farmland Trust methodology, which is, for better or worse, it tends to show that open space is good, commercial, industrial is good, residential tends to not generate as much in taxes as it demands in services. Almost across the board, those kinds of, that AFT methodology results in those kinds of things. So the firm that was hired in 2002 or early 2000s to do this study used their own methodology. And it came up with some fairly surprising results that were questioned at the time. And so then the city ended up hiring Russ Tebow to try to repeat that study to see if he could get the same results, and he could not. The firm that did the original study claimed some proprietary information there that they would not share. And so Russ Tebow was not able to replicate those results. And as a result, that study was basically just sort of set aside as not useful, not trusted.
Right.
Well,
I would think it'd be a worthwhile thing to find out. I would imagine that this kind of study has been done in a lot of different cities and towns. And I would imagine there's one or two firms, national firms, that are really, really good at it. And it might be worthwhile to try to figure out who is really good and respected at, sort of digesting this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's, how a study is done really does have an enormous impact on what the results are. Like somebody could say, well, what does retail do? And the real question is, there's downtown retail and then there's strip retail. And, those are really, really different things. And the same with residential, there's, single family house residential, and then there's, studio apartment residential. So, I keep coming back to it because I think it's an important thing for the city to really digest and understand.
Go
I
ahead.
thought one of the interesting things about it was for the four projects, looked at in detail, is that the students per unit were substantially less than what had been projected. And the projection was sort of using, I think fairly conventional models or assumptions about how many students per household for the different unit sizes. But Prospect Hill is the only one that comes close, and even that one is about 20% less than what was assumed in the initial study. And so I think as a result, there's more of a case that where we have a school district that has capacity, i.e. we're not having to build new buildings to handle a growing number of pupils, that perhaps some of the residential development that has occurred is not as impactful as it might be in some other communities because of the large portion of households we're getting that don't have school-age children. And we know that part of that is because of the employment base at the HMC and some of the other employers around here, where we tend to get perhaps young professionals that are not necessarily raising families at this point in their life.
I think,
Karen.
go ahead, Karen, you want to speak?
Oh, thank you. I wasn't sure whether I was muted or not. I just wanted to echo the, I guess the request that Chip is putting out there, or desire to see some more data and to look into at least what the cost would be for an updated, a more comprehensive review, similar to the cost of community services study that was done almost 20 years ago, but maybe one that would even go further in depth. If I recall, the cost of community services study looked at different zoning uses, so different zones, maybe industrial, commercial, residential, but it didn't necessarily get all the way to the level of, for example, downtown retail versus strip retail, or even necessarily multifamily residential versus single family. So I think that the city definitely has been, this issue of growth and development is a perennial issue, and the more data that we can get, I think the people, the residents would appreciate that. It could be useful for planning board members, and certainly it would be useful for the city council. And I think, without committing to funding that study, I think I would at least be open to finding out how much a study like that would cost, and what would be the different ways that we could benefit from having that kind of data.
Thank you. I'd like to add to that, though, a caveat the other way. I found this information quite interesting, and it basically, to me, was based on using some averages to get at, and then to figure out on a per individual basis. So it brings everything back to the same base, and it tells an interesting story. And the question is, have we ever put this out? Is this information available? I mean, published, if you will, for the general population? Has the newspaper picked up on this and done a study that takes this information and puts it out there? Because it is a perennial and it needs to be broken down so that it's understood. But, you know, we show up as the highest percentage of taxes coming from the commercial side of the house. And we also show that the cost of some of the types of things that we expected didn't, on a per capita basis, don't really come through. And it's because we've got excess capacity, as we were talking about the school system that has room for additional. More children go in, and you're figuring out the cost per pupil. If you're not adding the building, it's going to drop. And so there is a sharing of the overhead, which is really at the cost structure that we need to get at. I mean, in other words, the costs are not smooth. They move in increments, huge increments, for new school buildings or things of that nature. How much of the costs don't change when we have an addition of 1,000 people, let us say, as an example, just to get the thinking going. How much does it change for the individual costs per citizen? I don't expect an answer, but that's the essence of why we show up rather well in most of these studies. Why Claremont doesn't show up particularly well in these studies. Is there some acceptance of that, or is that like I don't know what you're reading, Whitman, but it isn't what's there. That's what I saw.
Yeah, no, I
Go ahead, Chip.
I agree. No, I sort of saw the same.
Well, the study was public, and we did talk about it, you know, when it came out originally from Russ, but and it was kind of prompted by a group of residents, and I think the residents who were involved with it was the Houses on the Hill project, particularly, that, you know, was the catalyst for getting this study done. So it was certainly discussed in public. I don't know how much more traction it would get at this point. Now it's 3 years old, or almost 3 years old, and I think it was kind of looked at with suspicion at the time anyway, from the, you know, at least from some of the people who were protesting the Houses on the Hill project.
Right, Karen, I'm sure there'll be protests no matter what was said, but you know, I'm just wondering, in today's world of communication, if we can't figure out a way to take this and graph them out, show the differences, talk about it in text, and try to put it to bed whenever it comes up, whatever the facts are. I mean, I'm not trying to change the facts. I just know everybody says taxes are too high, no matter what. And I think, you know, we're showing that right now we're spending a lot of money, but we're showing the results also. And so there'll be people who are going to be saying they wish that we weren't doing this. And there are people who say this is a good idea. It's about time we fixed up that road or that turn or that corner or whatever, that of the sewer lines. We have to make the positive case, I think, in order to continue to make this progress.
Is that something you would propose that the Economic Development Commission take the lead on, in maybe, I don't know, writing letters to the editor or writing an op-ed for the Valley News or something, for example?
I would like to say that we would support the study that you all started out talking about, if in fact we have a plan to how to market it to the people, to the community. How do we get this changed into positive progress on this subject? That's what I want to know. We can do the study, and the council can understand it and know what's going on, but we have to really turn it into a positive force, whatever it tells us, to make it to justify it. That's how I see it. I mean, whatever you want to use to get there is fine.
I'd like to figure out if there's a firm that's a little less local, regional, that would be a good sort of go-to to engage, to kind of, we can say, look, we've had this study from almost 20 years ago. We had another study in 17, and if there's a truly respected national firm that could come in and sort of dive deep, we'd have a lot of information for the public to sort of see what works and what doesn't. And, it's sort of what was driven at in the arts and culture task force, early council stuff, conversations of, what you dig into the impact of the arts on a community, and there's real serious data that you can get and feed back to the community and say, this is the economic benefit of doing this. And I feel like if we could do the same thing for different types of development for our town, not generically, but for our town, that would have a lot of power.
I'm going to be the skeptic here. I don't think that this should be a priority here. I think, partially the general economic collapse that we're in the midst of is going to throw a lot of historic data off kilter, like, the role of retail. We don't really know if retail a year or two from now is going to be anything like it was 5 years ago, unfortunately. And furthermore, though, a lot of the issues for Lebanon are specific to New Hampshire's tax structure, which is sort of skewed to an extreme that few other states have, in as much as we have this really high reliance on property taxes for both education, but in general for all local and state government funding. There's just no other state that has so much reliance on property taxes. I think one metric that we could track that would be helpful is our ranking of equalized tax rate. And unfortunately, what this study showed is that from 2010 to 2016, we moved up from the 160th highest equalized tax rate to the 171st highest equalized tax rate. And part of that has to do with our unusual characteristics of having so much daytime population versus overnight residential. So we know we have a police department that is scaled more for a community of 25 or 30,000 than one of 13,000. And that's partially because of our daytime population, a good chunk of which is passing through. 5 interchanges on the interstate and two major two hospitals, regional hospitals, one multi-state regional hospital. So I just don't know that this should be a priority to try to think about spending more money on a study when there's so many things that are going on, and I'm not sure anybody's asking for it. And I just don't know how.
You might be right. You might be right.
We could look into the cost,
Yeah,
but
it's a-
but I
that's a
think
really
for now,
fair
this
point,
is a
Liz, about
reference.
the impact of the virus and everything.
We're going to have enough financial problems without thinking of new ways to spend money.
I'm with
I
you.
think you're right.
Yeah.
So, what is the purpose of us putting this on the agenda? If we're, where do we utilize this that we've got?
I think it showed up on the, this is David Brooks. I think it showed up on the agenda this month because it was specifically mentioned the last time we met.
Yes.
And it was asked to be shared.
Yes, that's right.
One additional piece of information that I can offer is that one of the deliverables from Stu Arnett was a spreadsheet that could be used going forward to continue to track impacts of development. And so we're in the process of using that same spreadsheet that he developed to review some of the Mount Sport Road developments applications by taking the data from their own fiscal impact statement and just plugging it in. And again, it doesn't spit out an answer as to whether things are good or bad, rosy or otherwise. It just tracks the information so that we can get a sense of what is happening.
Okay.
I think that would be useful, and it would be a way to bring people back to this report. I mean, if you had an update with some basic spreadsheet analysis, that could be posted as a just as part of the Lebanon social media. You know, here's a little update, and here's the original study. So that would be a way to get people who might be interested in this topic to maybe go back and look at the study if they didn't look at it the first time.
That's actually
All right.
an idea.
Great idea.
I'm sure David will take that into consideration. I think we've covered this. Let's move on to the number of employment vacancies at DH, unless somebody has further.
You know, and I'm going to defer on that because of the all the happenings of the last month and a half. I've got to email out to Sarah Courier, who's sort of the lead contact at DH, to try to get an update. I should have that. I'll send it out either later today or tomorrow, and be a good marker. They've had a lot of changes in the last couple months.
New changes are on their way also, which is
Yeah.
that they're getting ready to start moving back towards having operations take place within the next couple of weeks across all of the hospitals in the DH system. I'm aware of that much.
As
sure.
a matter of fact, since we're talking about this, I just got pinged back by Sarah, and she said, somewhat complicated, layered question. We've got 700 open positions, and I think that's kind of the punchline. But I'll send around what she went on to give some more detail, but I'll send it around via email.
Okay. Is there anything else in that, John?
No, nope, that was an agenda item that was requested the last time, and that's why I put it on for this meeting.
Okay. I'm not aware of the RVC study, so somebody has to fill in and
Shelley's
talk
not
about
available
what
to us.
feasibility for.
Yeah, Shelley's not available to us right now. I don't know, Dave, if you have any comment on that, because I haven't seen anything new on that.
No, I reached out to Shelley to ask for a copy of that report when it was available, and she said she would be happy to share that. But I haven't gotten anything, so I don't know if it's available yet or not.
Okay.
What is it about? Does anybody know?
The city did I believe we got a CDBG grant to study the feasibility of repurposing, if you will. That's maybe too extreme a term. Making use of the River Valley Community College site on the Lebanon Mall as an incubator facility and a sort of a shared workspace for entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah. I remember when that
So
came up.
Yep. And I thought the results were positive, but I haven't seen the report.
Yeah,
Right.
I recently connected with Shelley actually on whether there's any space in that facility for lease, and she's, I guess, you know, RVCC is actually doing much better than it has been with new programs, and this might be a reflection of the last couple months, but she noted that the feasibility study was a very positive thing. It's just unclear whether how much of it's actually going to be needed there.
Okay. So we'll leave it there until we get back. And the next thing on the agenda is the West Lebanon and Charette. I would assume, David, that's in your bailiwick.
Yes, sir.
What you got
The
to
charrette,
tell us?
the charrette report was finalized and presented to the city council on April 15th. You can find a copy of the report itself in the agenda materials through the city's website. It's a very large file, too large to email, but you can get it off the webpage. You can also watch the presentation that was given and the discussion that followed, which was pretty good, pretty positive overall. The charrette, as you may know, was a 2-day event back in October of last year, where we had more than 50 people show up for different events across the 2 days to talk about the future of West Lebanon, what kinds of improvements and actions could be implemented there to make improvements. Some of it, a lot of it relates to Westboro Yard, which is not surprising. Some of it is just streetscape improvement and cleaning it up and making it look prettier. There was some discussion about parking and traffic, economic development, certainly. So it was a pretty good report. Gave us a little bit more, finer grain detail on some of the concepts that were already expressed in the 2012 master plan in terms of actions and strategies to work on. And so the council basically accepted the report, asked me to go ahead and finalize it, and then move towards implementation, which involves all kinds of things from organizational capacity, like a West Lebanon subcommittee, to physical, capital improvement type projects, to parks versus economic development, those kinds of decisions that need to be made and prioritized.
Well, this is, I saw the article in the paper and remembered back to years ago when we started this project. And, I think you're making tremendous progress on this with the state. Is that the case, or is there, where are we with this? You're leading this, Sean, I believe, right?
Yes, I'm trying to lead this, which is a challenge. Unfortunately, under the circumstances, I got a really bad feeling that we're going to lose our funding for the demolition, the state funding for the demolition of the Westboro Yard. The state is looking at making some very deep cuts in its budget to be able to operate, and we're going to be in that same spot here very, very quickly. And I'll be talking to council about that on the 6th. But anyway, right now, where we left it off last was the state had planned to go out to bid in the spring, and it's now the spring, and they obviously have not done that. We have a draft agreement that we have submitted to DOT, which DOT has approved with some new language. That has been sent to the Attorney General's office, waiting for legal approval on that. And that usually takes some time, and obviously they're really busy now with COVID-19 issues. So I don't know when we're going to get a response back on that. I suspect that's not so much going to be the issue. And that agreement says that the city will allow the materials that come from that site to be deposited at our landfill, which we plan to grind up and use as road base, the non-hazardous materials anyway. That's a value of about $287,000 towards the project. But I think the big thing issue now is waiting to see what's going to happen with the funding. And I just realistically don't have a good feeling that funding is still going to be available to us, but we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. And that's the biggest push for that, of course. We do have funding in the Westboro Improvement Fund, which the council, we discussed with the council at the last meeting. We're moving forward with at least a playground that's adjacent to the ball field off of Maple Street. That'll help some of those improvements there. As you know, we already cleaned up 3 Seminary Hill Road, the corner of Seminary Hill Road and Elm Street. That's already been cleaned up. That building's been demolished. That's done. The tunnel, not the tunnel project, but the dry bridge project, we're waiting on final approval from DOT on the plan for the 50-50 split for the access road to get us into the Westboro yard. And of course, that's over $8 million project, that tunnel, not the tunnel, but the bridge and the access road and the other pieces that go along with that. So there's some big money that'll be tied up in West Leb, all that revolve around the Westboro yard and immediately adjacent to it. And we'll have to wait and see what happens with the rest of that. But that has been the main focus. That has been the energy. I did have a discussion with the mayor a couple weeks ago when things were less dire than what they are now about funding a lobbying firm or at least a law firm, not necessarily the one we have presently, but a firm to go and move forward on expanding the rail trail all the way through West Leb. We think that's a fight that we can win, but it's going to be a fight, and we have to go through the process to get there. I've had discussions with Senator Shaheen's office, and we have a path forward to do that with the Transportation Safety Board, but the sub-transportation safety board is involved with that. We think we can win that fight, but it'll be a fight. But that was prior to the more dire economic circumstances that we are now faced with in terms of what we may be able to spend money on going into 2021. So there's a lot of pieces there involved in this. I think one of the key things is creating this subcommittee to move forward, and so we have a citizens group that starts to work on this with our planning department to lay some of these projects out. But again, projects are also going to be contingent upon funding, and this may be a blip in time where that may be more challenging than ever.
Yes, well, it's for sure that you put. I think we got to keep it alive. We got this far.
So we can map out what a committee would actually look like. We had one previously in one of the drafts for EDC, but I'm thinking of a broader committee of people that might be involved in this to actually work on some of the action items, because I don't think we want to take our time on it. Because quite frankly, I think this commission is going to be very active as we move forward in the recovery from what I'm seeing is a recession that's before us in the entire world right now.
So yes, let's expand on that.
Group of
What was that, Karen?
There's a great group of West Lebanon residents who have created a listserv. It's hosted by Jenny Lynn, I think, and it came out of the meeting that Sean had with West Lebanon residents, early on when he arrived. So I think that would be a really great list to ask for volunteers for a steering committee. Obviously, of course, the people involved in the charrette as well. I thought the charrette was a really really valuable, and it wasn't $500,000, which was great. So I'm really glad that it gave us some stuff we can move forward with.
And I guess that's the key thing, is taking what has come out of that and actually putting pen to paper and actually funding these projects. If we're going to do improvements in that little island there by the Irving station there, then now's the time to get cost estimates to do that. And what's going to be in that area? Is it going to be plants? Is there going to be some sort of artwork? If it's going to be plants, we want water extended to that. So now is the time to start moving forward and actually getting cost estimates. There's been a lot of talk about streetscape improvements. Let's figure out what exactly those are, get cost estimates, and figure out how we're going to fund that. We do have an appropriation for some money in there, although I said appropriation, that there's no money there, real money there yet. There's just the authority to borrow money to make that work. But we're going to, again, under the circumstances we're going to have to rethink some of these things and how we spend our funds.
So this is Bill Dunn. I'm just going to add that the charrette is also on the radar screen of the Arts and Culture Commission. So that's an opportunity for some small victories, whether they're weekend performances or mobile art receptions. So there are some low-cost items that could happen on weekends that just bring vibrancy and awareness to the area without having to be big-ticket items. So we'll keep that on the radar screen in Arts and Culture.
All right.
So there's something to think about, and I've told all my department heads, now is the time to develop projects and try to get them as close to shovel ready as possible. There's been talk about stimulus funds for infrastructure projects, and if we've got them on the shelf or as close on the shelf as they can be and they're ready to go, we may be able to take advantage of those. I haven't heard more about that recently. That was brought up by the president, and it's also been discussed by our legislative delegation in Congress. But of course, there's a whole lot of other issues that are going on right now. But what we need to do as a city, we need to be ready to take advantage of any of those opportunities if they exist. And right now, we're not ready for those situations in terms of the West Leb projects. We need to get there. And we're going to do that. Staff is going to do that, but we really need citizen input to talk about the details of that. And sometimes that takes longer. So we're going to be doing this dual track, trying to get this committee going at the same time, starting to work on some of these things so we have something that is ready to go potentially.
Okay. What can we do to get started? What do you see as what do you have in mind?
So David and I and Paula have a meeting to talk about actual action items. I think it's next week, David. I don't have my.
I think it's next Thursday or Friday.
Yeah. So we're going to actually map those out in there so that we do the work that staff needs to do to get this going. So that's what's on our radar screen. And then we're going to have to formulate this committee, and I'm going to have to give something to the council to look at a little bit with a little bit better detail as to what that's going to look like. I'll try to get that done over the weekend, because right now it's putting out forest fires every day right now here.
Yeah. Another thing that came up at the council meeting was just the question of whether this might be another new appropriate TIF district. And I think David did report just a preliminary look at it. It could fit within the limitations that the TIF law provides. So that to the extent that there might be some redevelopment opportunities or new commercial type construction in that West Lebanon CBD area, there might be the possibility of capturing some of that, the revenue from that, to reinvest in some of those improvements. So that, I think that's something we'll want to follow and help advise on.
The only thing I'll say about that is I have skepticism about using TIF districts without clear objectives. And anyway, but we can deal with that when we get to that point.
What I'm hearing is right now the issue is to figure out how to operate more in the subcommittee venue in West Lebanon. And so are we participants and the organization is elsewhere, or are we the organizers of this?
Well, we're the organizers. It should come under EDC in my view, and I talked to the council about that before. But the original committee we had was somewhat small, and I think we need a bigger committee of people, more citizen participation in that. And that's what I want to work through with David and get a better plan. I think we'll be better served with that.
Yep. We can wait for that to come from you and pick it up and move forward. I think we need this, perhaps the same look at getting more people involved at any rate.
As Councilor Hill pointed out, there's some pretty dedicated people who have an interest in this, and we saw them at the charrette, and we hear from them on a regular basis. So I think we really need to utilize that energy.
Okay. I think we've covered the impacts of COBA on the local economy. I mean, that's what you've been talking about to a certain extent. Is there other things on the agenda that you had in mind, or anybody else has in mind?
On this issue, I just wanted to talk about one thing. The city doesn't have an economic development department, but what we do have is a strong relationship with UVBA, and I think they're doing a great job of getting information out to businesses, and I'm using that in essence as my economic development department. And I think I'm actually kind of like the way this is working, and this may be better than actually having an economic development department. But nonetheless, I think Tracy's done a good job putting information out in the myriad of places if you're a business trying to get that information. I think she's helping out with that a lot, and I want to use that as our primary tool because we don't have our own economic development department to keep businesses alive and help them recover from this pandemic disaster and what I see as a recession coming our way as well.
Is there, this is Karen with a question for Sean.
Yes.
I'm wondering, and I guess, I know Bill is on the phone too, and he's not in his banker hat right now, but I'd be curious to know how much of the, Paycheck Protection Program, those loans have made it to the Upper Valley and to Lebanon in particular. I don't know how we could get that data, but I guess I'm curious to know how much help people here are getting from the federal stimulus. And then I also recall, I'm thinking back to the last time, and there was stimulus funding that went out, and some of it was targeted to infrastructure. I know there's money that's going up maybe in the next wave of federal legislation. There's going to be funds targeted to municipalities, and I just remember last time the whole thing was about shovel-ready projects, and so we might want to start, amping up our efforts internally to make sure that we've got some good candidate projects in case there is funding that comes out, that's just designed to move quickly and get it to projects that are ready to go. So those two questions: how much help is coming to businesses in Lebanon, and also, from the municipal perspective, can we get some shovel-ready projects ready?
Yeah, so the first one, we do get each state, we know how much each state gets, but I don't know if they are able to break it down any smaller than that. Let me ask Tracy, because Tracy's on a conference call right now with the BEA and all the other chambers of commerce. That's why she's not in our meeting. Let me ask her if she can get that information and see if they have it broken down by region. That might be helpful, unless Bill has some better data on that.
Sure. I'll just give some anecdotal insight. So keep in mind, Mascoma just one bank in the Upper Valley region. So there'll be plenty of time to dissect even our own data internally, and I'm sure that the bank would be willing to share some of the breakdowns on demographic once we get there. But speaking off the top of my head, I will tell you that since the 3rd, when this program launched, the bankers, the local regional bankers or community bankers have been working nonstop, about 10:30, 11:30 every single night since the 3rd. So my bank, and now this is bank-wide data, so it's not all geared geographically to the Upper Valley or to Lebanon, but I'll get there in a second, has placed $125 million which is, I think, about 1,200 loans and represents about 13,000 jobs. So that's in our service area. Now we run from Keene to Littleton and maybe as far south as New London and up into most recently the Burlington market, but we don't have a huge presence up there. So I think it's fair to say that most of the placement comes from what has historically been our core, which is the Canaan, White River Junction up to Bethel, inclusive of Lebanon and West Lebanon and White River Junction. But that data can be dissected, and I can make that a project to provide or try to provide greater detail to this committee once we stop the funding. We're still working nonstop. Now, when I look, I am just one commercial loan officer in one bank. My bank has 15 commercial loan officers. If I look at just the list of my customers that I've been tracking, I can tell you that there's at least $5 or $6 million that, Sean, you could walk to from where you're sitting right now. So there's a fair amount of money making it out into the community.
So, but that's for 8 weeks though, right, Bill?
That's correct. That's primarily geared towards paying employees over the next 8-week period.
Then after that, the bill that they're working on right now, I understand is at least another 8 weeks, but then after that, and that gets us sometime into the summer. But that would be new applicants, and I believe it's also supposed to be for people who can renew that. So we've got some help coming our way, but I think we've got a longer road to hoe here, unfortunately, and I don't know what's going to come beyond that. The other part of it is we've been talking to our legislative delegation, especially Representative Congresswoman Custer, Senator Hassan, and Shaheen. There was supposed to be $250 billion in this bill that they're discussing this week. However, that has been removed, and that's no longer under consideration by the Trump administration, and the Republicans they don't want to see that money in there, that $250 billion for towns and cities that would have been able to help deal with some of the losses in revenue. So there is no source of money coming to towns and cities for loss of revenue, which is the biggest problem we're having right now. There is some money for Stafford Act to reimburse us for emergency costs, but that's a lower amount. That's only 75%. The governor's already stated, and that's why I brought up the issue about state cuts, that the $1.25 billion that's coming to the state is not to replace lost revenues at the state or local level. So right now, we don't actually have a whole lot coming our way that we know of. There's nothing that's been approved yet, and there's nothing that's on the drawing board to be approved. We did get $1 million for the airport. Most of that we're actually going to be able to use, which is really good news. And we got $34,000 to help reimburse Medicare reimbursements for ambulance service. And that's all we have, and there really isn't anything else coming other than reimbursement from some emergency management costs.
Sean, what's the scale of the tax hit so far? Do people have a decent handle on that, or is it?
We have estimates. We're going to make a presentation to the council on the 6th. Talk about what our projections are, because we're refining those. This is unprecedented. It's hard to try to make an assessment. We're trying to compare it to the 2008 recession, but that really isn't much of a comparison because this region was pretty much insulated from recessions because it has the hospitals, which generally are not impacted by the recession. And we also had a lot of high-tech businesses that generally aren't impacted by the recession. However, every single sector is impacted by this recession. And that is going to be very different for this city than what it has dealt with before. I tried to do some historical research, and it appears that the most recent dire economic circumstances was the loss in the mills. I believe it was in the 50s that occurred to this city when it was flat on its back. We haven't had anything like that in 70 years now, and this is just a totally different type of scenario. So it's difficult to project what those losses are going to be. It really is. We'll have a better idea when that first tax bill goes out, but even that first tax bill, I don't expect to be too bad. It's the second one that I'm really concerned about, the November, December tax bill. And again, we're going to be providing some better data to the council and some plans that we're putting into place as contingencies.
Yeah.
If I could just add a couple, Bill, once again, just add a couple more stories to this. I also head up the municipal financing division for the bank. So I'm just going to tell a couple stories. I think most towns are anxious about the collection of property taxes. And in fact, some towns that were in the early cycles or the cycles of water sewer have actually already seen runoff just on that line item, which puts them in a position of worrying about what's going to happen when real estate taxes go out or property taxes go out. There are, in fact, towns that have never had to borrow that are now seriously making inquiry to the bank.
I had a phone call today from one plaza owner. Actually, it was the Powerhouse Mall, and he stated that the tenants have used the force majeure provision of their rental agreements that does not require them to pay their rent because the state isn't allowing them to open up their business, so therefore they don't have to pay their rent, and that is part of the contract. And they've got a $22,000 per month property tax bill that they owe the city. That's what it equates to, and they're not going to be able to pay that. And obviously, I have no desire to tax deed that building. So we're going to have to, and we are working on, we had a huddle this morning with I call the money people who work in the city here, the different departments that deal with the money pieces, that we have to have a number of plans in place and how we're going to deal with this. And we have action items we're working on, and we do have a plan. And like I said, we'll present that to the council on the 6th, but it's not a pretty picture, obviously.
Yeah. Well, there we have it.
Yes. Steve, back to you.
What else are we going to cover today? Anything?
That was it, unless somebody else has something else they want to chat about.
All right. Speak up. How about future agenda items? Is somebody? I think we'll be overwhelmed when we get there. A month from now. So I'm not too worried about asking for that.
I think our focus should be on our strategy to recover from this situation and the action items that we're going to need to take to do that. I think that needs to be our primary focus right now. We need to switch from long-term planning mode into emergency response mode and disaster recovery mode.
Okay.
I concur. Thank you, Sean.
Agreed.
The real thing is, and I'm hearing it from businesses, is that they need real property tax relief. And that's not easy to do. Of course, if this job were easy, somebody else would probably be doing it. And that's what I have to work on with my staff. How do we possibly do that? And I need to give some decent recommendations to the council. And that's the big issue right now. This talk about abating interest is great, but it really doesn't make the difference. The only thing that's really going to help these businesses from the city's perspective is how do you provide real property tax relief? And that's going to be a challenge.
Is there any debt that we can refinance?
No, because a lot of it is revolving fund debt with the state, and that's already at very low interest rates. There's not much we can do with that.
What about the school? Does the school? How about the school? I don't think they have as much state money, or do they?
They have the debt for the middle school, and I don't know their status. I've got a meeting scheduled with them and their business administrator to talk about cash flow and all these issues. That'll be next week. We'll be doing.
Can you ask them about that? At the county level, we were able to refinance the debt on the jail, on the new jail, which was built around the same time as the middle school. They actually they're almost identical, which is a little weird, but we were able to save significant money from refinancing the debt on the bonds for the jail.
Yeah, I'll bring that up with them when I see them, because again, one of the big things is going to be cash flow, but I can certainly talk about the long-term debt pieces.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to think this story is throughout the entire U.S., if not the world, right? You have owners that can't pay their taxes, that can't pay, this. So then the city's like, well, how do we pay our people? How do we do our things? And then they look to the states, and the states don't have any money. And it ultimately is like, how much can the Fed support? It's all flowing downhill.
And are we queued up were we supposed to be doing a reassessment next year of property values? Is that due April 1 of next year or the following year?
This year, it's due by September of this year.
Oh, so we're in the midst of a revaluation.
We are.
Oh, great.
Yeah, that has a whole nother slew of problems. That was discussed at our meeting today as well. We're going to spend some time on the 6th chatting about this issue and all of its different facets.
Well, I suppose it's better that we're valuing as April 1 this year than April 1 of next year because property values might be down more as time progresses, at least the measurable comps.
Well, good, depending on who you're talking. I mean, from a
Right.
property owner's perspective, they would want it next year. From the city's perspective, we would want it this year. I mean, it's, yeah,
Yeah.
it's all perspective.
But we don't have a choice. Our ratio is at a point where it needs to be done anyways. But the issues are, we were looking at a 10 to 20% increase in residential values and as much as 50% for commercial. And that's based upon numbers for 2019 and early 2020. And by September, I think the landscape is going to be different, but the data is based on the older data. And then what will happen is if we, again, there's a number of different strategies to address this, but if we just continue to operate that way, by the time these go out in September and the new tax bills come out and people see the higher values, and then they file what would be an avalanche of abatements that would be discussed by the BTLA sometime in 21, when we're probably going to be deeper into a recession. And they got to look at those numbers from back to 2019 and what they're dealing with right in front of them. They're going to say, how can you folks be so far off? So there's a number of issues here that have to be addressed on that particular problem alone.
Mm.
Yeah, that's.
Well, on that note, I'll move we adjourn.
Yeah. Maybe I'll take a walk with my dog.
Okay, so Councilor Belo has motioned to adjourn, seconded by
Bill Dunn will second.
Bill Dunn is second. And we'll need a roll call vote there, Mr. Chairman.
Roll call vote.
Clifton Belo votes yes.
Bill Dunn votes yes.
David
Chip
Newman
Brown
votes yes.
Votes yes.
Steve Whitman votes yes. Chip Brown, you haven't voted yet.
Yes, no, I was trying to speak, or maybe I'm on mute. Now, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Got you now.
Yeah, I vote yes.
Okay, meeting's adjourned at 5:12 p.m.
Yep.
Back to work. I've got more loans to make. Have a good night.
Take care, guys.
Thank you for that.
Hey, Sean, just on an interesting note, you're